A little bit about our host. I think many of you have joined previous sessions, but Andy comes to us with over 40 years of expertise in fundraising. And this is the second series that we have been delighted to have him join and speak to our local partners. And with that, I know we have a lot to cover, so I'll hand it over to you, Andy.
Thank you. Let me thank all the folks at the Bob Woodruff Foundation who are supporting me and supporting you, and that includes Deirdre and Rhiannon and Hunter and Meg and John and all the people behind them whose names I don't know, but I know you're out there somewhere doing your work, so thank you for that. Let's go ahead and share the screen. And a couple of notes here. This will be familiar if you've been with me before. First of all, we're going to be using chat for questions all afternoon long. So if you have questions or comments about anything that's going down in the webinar and you want to comment on it or ask a question, I will have my friends at the Woodruff Foundation pay attention to chat, and periodically they will interrupt me with your questions. In addition, we'll have time at the end to do questions. In addition, if you're still asking questions and the hour's over, I'll even stick around and answer questions as long as it takes to answer them all. So don't be shy about that. Our job here is to engage you.
Andy, I'm getting the slides up. Just a brief technical difficulty. They'll be up in just a second.
Okay, and let me know. I can do slide share if I need to. I'm set up to do that. So the other thing I would say here is that we're going to do some participatory stuff with you. We've got a poll coming up shortly. We also have a breakout where you'll be talking to each other about some of your own fundraising experiences. And I often say that I'm an excuse to get everybody else in the room together. I have some expertise in this area for sure, but you probably have collectively more than I do. So part of the work, and it's a little challenging on Zoom, but it's not impossible, is part of the work is to add your voice and your questions and your feedback and essentially talk to each other. So I encourage you to participate in all the ways that seem appropriate. We do have slides. Well done, Ree. Thank you. So our topic today is major gifts, part one. And what I want to focus on is doing major gifts campaign style. And as we get into this, you'll see what I mean by this. Let's go to the next slide, please. I am curious if you do any donor meetings in person to ask for gifts. And I'll even be broad with the word donor. If you meet with businesses to solicit them, if you meet with foundations, if you meet with corporations, if you meet with individuals, and I'll even give you Zoom points here. If you're not meeting with people because of the pandemic, but you're having these one-on-one conversations, totally counts. In addition, I'm curious to what's working, what isn't working, what have you learned? Like, what do you know about this? And so feel free to use chat for this purpose, and let me know if you've been involved in any way in sort of face-to-face solicitation. And we're going to get into the logistics both in this session and the next session. I'm going to give you the reasons why meeting with donors is key, why it's central. And then in the next session, we're going to talk a little more about the specifics of the meeting. And I'm actually going to walk you through a donor meeting step by step, comment by comment, idea by idea. And we're going to be doing some practicing around that as well. There will be a little bit of a role play. So let's see what we've got in chat here. South Dakota is pretty open, always trying to meet in person. Good. It may involve some driving, but I think that's a good thing. Deirdre says storytelling is key. That is correct. I would even flip that, Dee, and I would say story listening is even more important. Because what you're going to learn as we get into this is a good donor meeting is not the one where you're doing all the talking and you're pitching and you're talking at somebody. A good donor meeting is one where you're asking questions and they're telling you their story and how they connect with your mission and your work. So what we like to say, those of us who go out and meet with donors and ask for gifts, is that a good donor meeting is the donor talking 2/3 of the time and you only talking 1/3 of the time. So storytelling, absolutely. Story collecting, story listening, even better. So what are we seeing in chat? Dee, I'll call on you, help me out here. What are you seeing in chat as far as how people are doing this?
It sounds like different ways of hosting donors. online,
Yeah.
phone, in person. I'm sure the pandemic has made a lot of
Yeah.
that wanting to make them comfortable would be
Yes.
key.
Yeah, this is good. So I'm seeing it too, and there's a little bit of everything going on, and I think that's appropriate. So let's go to the next slide, please. And keep feeding chat as we go. I am curious about your largest face-to-face ask. And I will be as generous here as I can. A face-to-face ask could be asking an individual to give a donation. It could be meeting with a business to pitch them. It could be meeting with a foundation face-to-face as part of a grant application, right? If you run your own business and you've ever gone out and asked for a customer, I would give you credit for that, right? If you ever asked your parents for money, I totally give you credit for that. So what's your largest ask? And go ahead and put the poll up. You'll see there's ranges here, up to 500, 500 to 5,000, 5,000 to 50, more than 50, or perhaps you've never done it or you just don't know. And please notice that the verb here is ask, not get. So if you asked and you got turned down, I give you points for that. So people are putting stuff in chat, and that's good. Rhea, is there a poll?
There sure is. Just 10 seconds and I'll get it up here.
Lovely, thank you.
I've got some internet issues over here today.
Yeah,
so
well, you're in rural America like me, so
I'm sure you know all about that.
I know the drill. Well, I should knock on a lot of wood here, but I'm like 120 webinars into the pandemic, and mostly it's worked for me. Yeah, it is amazing. My luck is extreme. And I bring this up in part. I mean, the reason I'm asking this question is because the amount maybe even doesn't matter. It's the relationship, it's the contact. And I have this feeling like if you can ask somebody for 50 bucks, that's an ask. And then it's the same skill set you would need. We'll get into this in more detail to ask at a higher level. But I'm always sort of curious as to what the baseline level is for something like this. So in a second here.
Yeah, it looks like in the chat, Andy, we got a lot of around the 50K range, and someone said 400,000 for a building. So that was a big ask.
That rocks. That's good. Well done. Yeah, I'm seeing 50, 50. These are good. You guys got some big numbers up here. I like it. 25, 400. Yeah, chat works for this too. And you know, then the question would be, what did you learn from that? And hopefully some of what I teach you will reflect what you've learned from doing this. All right.
Looks like it did not
launch. Yeah, well, let's not sweat it because it's not the most important thing we're doing today. Okay. So let's head on to the next slide. So we're talking about major gifts, and that's one of those words that people might find scary or intimidating. So some notes on this. First of all, you decide what the word major means, right? That's up to you. My definition of major gift is it's a big enough amount of money that when you go online and you look at the gift or you open an envelope and the check comes out, you start dancing around and you're really happy. To me, that's the definition of a major gift, is makes you do your happy dance. As we have discussed in previous sessions, and I think we'll look at this a little bit again today, there's a lot of money out there. Median household giving, $900+ more than half of Americans give to charitable organizations. You know, monthly giving makes it even easier. I think the limiting factors here are how many people can you ask and how many relationships can you manage once people say yes. And I don't want you engaging with people and soliciting them unless you have the systems in place to keep them informed, to keep them engaged, to show appreciation, all that stuff. So for a lot of the grassroots kind of groups we have on a call like this, my advice is that your major gift category is probably 500 or 1,000, maybe a little higher, maybe 25 or 5,000, 2,500 or 5,000. And I don't know if this seems like a scary number, but I will tell you, like $500 is $42 a month. $1,000, $84 a month. These are much smaller bills than some people are paying for streaming services or cable or, you know, a night out for dinner. And I just feel like that level is wildly affordable. So you have to be the boss of what major means. I leave that to you. Now, I am pitching, next slide here, the idea that you can do this in a time-limited fashion. And, you know, realistically, you can do major gifts throughout the year. If I worked at a hospital or a university or a major arts organization and I was a major gifts officer, what would happen is I'd have a portfolio of relationships. I have 100, 150, maybe 200 people. And throughout the year, I would be cultivating those folks and I would be engaging them and I would be periodically asking them and I would be thanking them and looking for ways to plug them into the organization. It would be a full-time gig year round. However, for a lot of the smallish groups that I work with, it's hard to manage that given all the other things you're doing. And so one way to make sure that gets done is to pick a season. And it could be 4 months or 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12. I mean, 12 is sort of random, but it's basically a campaign model. You got a beginning, you got a middle, you have an end. You have a goal, you have deadlines, you have structure, you have accountability. So I think for folks who are just sort of thinking about, do we want to do major gifts? What would that look like for us? This is not a bad way to think about it. It might actually ramp you up and get you to a place where you can follow through and start doing. Next slide. Now, at the risk of stating the obvious, fundraising is about people. It's about relationships. It's about how we treat each other. It's not about money. It is not about money. And the way that we build relationships is by having conversations with people. So I think it's possible these days to still do some donor meetings. We are navigating the pandemic. It makes it a little more complicated. Totally get that. Maybe it's outdoors. Maybe it's small group, like 2 people, 3 people. Maybe it's on Zoom, right? Maybe it isn't in person. But I think this is all about strengthening those relationships. And the other point here, and there's a lot of data around this, is people will give you 5 to 10 times more money in person than they will send you through the mail or they will give online. People will give you 2 to 3 times more money in person than they will give you over the phone when you call them up. So one of the reasons to try and meet with people is it's more lucrative. It generates more money for your organization. Next slide. So what I'm going to do here is take you through a step-by-step process. And we're going to do some pausing along the way. I'm going to teach you how to structure this campaign. And again, my goal when we come back in about 4 weeks for our final session is I'm going to teach you how to actually do the donor meeting. I'm going to structure it for you. I'll give you a little preview today, and then we're going to do a little practice around that. So step 1 is to figure out what you're raising money for. And for those of you who were back with me during session 1, we spent some time on this. I asked you some questions like, what's your favorite story about your organization? Who do you serve? What makes your work unique? Why do you care about the work? Those sorts of things. So you have to be able to articulate to a donor the value of your work. This may seem obvious to you, but one must understand that not everybody does what you do all day. Not everyone is necessarily as committed to the work as you are. So you have to be able to pick someone who's interested, but maybe not educated, or interested, but maybe not ankle deep in it or knee deep in it, and help them to understand the value of what you do. Next slide. The next thing, and this is really campaign 101, is you got to build a goal. You got to create a goal, and you got to build a chart. And the goal is, how much are we trying to raise during this campaign? Now, this might be a capital campaign for a building. It might be a big fundraising campaign for a new program, or it might just be your annual fundraising, for example, at the end of the year. And you might say, we are trying to raise $50,000 from individual donors at the end of this year in unrestricted dollars. And then what you do is you take that and you build what's known as a gift chart. And I'll show you a couple of these on the slides. I sent some to Ree earlier, and I believe they were passed along for you to look at as well. But the basic math looks like this. 10% of the people give you 60% of the money. That's the top tier. The next 20% of the people give you about 20% of the money. And everybody else, this is all the folks who might be giving $50 or $100. They're 70% of the donor pool, but they're only 20% of the money. So smart organizations, next slide, get out their calculators and they create what's known as a chart of gifts or a gift pyramid. This is actually in the shape of a pyramid, which makes it easy. So you can see how this is built. First column is how many donors are we talking about? The second column is how much do we need them to give? And the third column is when we add it all up, it's cumulative. How much are we raising from that group? So in this case, they need a lead gift of 5,000. They need one of those. They need 2 gifts at 2,500. That would be 5,000 for that category. They need 5 gifts at 1,000, et cetera. Their lowest number in this campaign is 500. And their goal here is to raise $37,500. Again, this is a relatively modest campaign goal for annual unrestricted fundraising. But what I love about it is there's some actual structure here. Because people are saying, like, we're trying to raise $100,000, and you ask them, how are you going to do that? What are the increments? And they haven't actually thought about it. So I've given you a formula, and here's an example. Next slide. Now, this is a bigger number, but it's the same kind of math. This is a capital campaign trying to raise $1 million. And same sort of situation here. They need 3 gifts of $100,000 and up. And you'll notice there's little stars in the boxes. That means they scored the gift, right? They got the commitment. They need 5 gifts at the second range, which is 50,000 to 99,999. They need 7 gifts at the third level, etc. And each of those stars is a commitment they have. So what you're looking at is roughly halfway through the campaign. This is helpful for 4 or 5 reasons. Number one, this is a really basic fundraising plan, right? We hit all these goals. We find all these gifts at these levels. We reach our target. The second thing is this is an accountability piece, because what you would do is you would build the chart first, and then you'd gather your team, your fundraising team, virtually or in a room, however you want to do it. And you'd say, okay, here's our goal. Here's our numbers. Who do we know that might give at these levels? And, you know, maybe some of it is foundation grants, or maybe some of it is businesses, and some of it is individuals, and maybe some of it is religious bodies or labor unions or whoever you're going to. But if you don't have prospects, it's not a real number. So one way to ground truth, reality test your goal is to build the chart and then start to drop in some names. Like, is there somebody out there that we know well enough to solicit for this amount of money? And if you don't have the names, then the number is probably unrealistic. The third thing I would say, and we'll get into this in the next session, is I think this is an awesome tool when you're asking for the money. Because, for example, if I was going to meet with, let's say, Hunter, and we're having the conversation, when we get to the ask, I might pull this piece of paper out of my briefcase and physically hand it to Hunter and say, here's our goal, $1 million. Here are the levels we're looking for. It's a big range, obviously. We're looking anywhere from $1,000 up to $100,000. And you'll see we've already gotten some gifts, which is awesome. I don't know how much to ask you for. Like, I'm clueless. Like, I don't know a correct amount for you. So what I want you to do is to study this chart and come back to me and say, here's an amount that would be meaningful to me. This is what I can do. And what I love about that is you've taken this big, hairy, difficult problem, which is how much should I ask for? And you've outsourced that to the donor. And you've said, here's the goal. Here are the options. I don't know what to ask you for. You tell me, how much should I ask you for? And it's a very elegant solution to that pretty knotty problem. So you can tell from my tone of voice, I am all about the gift chart. I think these tools are indispensable, necessary. Oh, nice. John's putting a gift range calculator in there. That's lovely. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, there are online calculators that can help you do this math. It's fairly basic math. You can also do it yourself with a physical calculator, but I love that there's a tool to do that. So thank you, John. That's great. Next slide. So you need a calendar. And what I have put up here, and I sent you a Word document. I sent to Ree, who sent to you a Word version of this, but I've got it spread over a couple of slides, is these are, I think, most of the tasks that you would need to pull off a campaign. And it's things like setting goals, identifying who's going to go out and meet with donors, training those people, identifying the prospects, dividing up the list, who's going to talk to whom, queuing up the meetings by sending letters and making phone calls, doing the meetings, Maybe you need some materials to prepare to give to the donors when you meet with them. There's some check-ins, maybe there's some retraining halfway through. And some of this is sort of project management 101. I think if you thought through this, even if you hadn't done it, you would land most of these tasks without being trained what they are. But I've made it a little easier by just getting them down here. And I want to say the calendar is flexible. And if this feels too, go to the next slide, please. If this feels too complex or too ornate and there's too much here, feel free to simplify. This is my initial take to get you thinking in this direction. So step 1, case. Step 2, goal and gift chart. Step 3, let's start to put this on a calendar and figure out when things are going to happen. Let's go to the next slide. Then we got to recruit people to help us do this, right? And this in some ways is the hardest thing. Board members, maybe you got a fundraising committee, maybe there's other volunteers. If you've got donors who love you and are committed to your cause, they could be really great askers, because that's known as a peer-to-peer ask, right? This is one donor saying to another, I've committed, I hope you will commit too, and that's very powerful. So we need to recruit people, we need to train them how to do this. And I think there has to be some sort of structure in terms of who is reporting to who. There has to be, if not a hierarchy, there has to at least be some lines of accountability. And it might be that you have 10 people doing visits and they all report to you. Or maybe you have 2 or 3 people that are like your lieutenants, and each of them get 2 or 3 people. And the solicitors are reporting to whoever is the next level who is reporting to you. I wouldn't make it complicated because we want to keep this relatively informal. But we have to be able to follow up with people to make sure they're actually doing the tasks they have volunteered to do. So let me pause here. Are there questions? And again, if there's anything in chat, I will encourage my colleagues from Bob Woodruff Foundation to jump in and feed me any questions that come in. Okay, we will proceed. Next slide. So, as noted, I'm going to go into this, excuse me, in a lot more detail when we reconvene. However, I'll talk you through this very quickly now. Bear with me. You want to build some rapport with the donor. And that means asking questions. You know, how are the kids? What have you been up to lately? How's your fall? At some point, the transition is to state your goals for the meeting. Just so we're clear, Dee, I'm here for 3 things today. I want to learn more about you. I want to tell you about the work we're doing. And as you know, this is a fundraising conversation. I'm here to ask for your support. And for me, it's always those 3 things. I want to learn about you. I want to tell you about our work. I want to ask you to give. And hopefully you have queued this up in advance with an email or a phone call or a letter or some combination of these things saying, I want to meet with you. We're in the middle of our fundraising campaign. I would love to talk with you about our work and see if you'd like to support what we're doing. Number 3 is about connecting them to the mission. Like, why do you care about this stuff? You know, so maybe I say to Meg, I noticed you've supported our work for 5 years. You've been very generous. I hope you feel appreciated, because we certainly appreciate you. I want to know why you give. Like, why do you care about this work? Why is it meaningful to you? And again, the goal is to get them to talk to you about why they care, because they're going to eventually talk themselves into giving if they have the opportunity to do that. You want to tell them about the work. That's the pitch. You want to ask for the gift, and you can ask with the gift chart. I showed you that already, or you can simply ask, I hope you consider a gift of X. It would mean a lot to us. Can you support this work today? You can respond to any objections, concerns, questions. You want to be prepared for that. And then at the end, you want to close the meeting by restating any agreements, such as, just so we're clear about what happened today, I asked you to consider a gift of $5,000. You said you'd like to give something. You weren't sure about the amount. You're going to consider it. You're going to talk to your spouse. You're going to get back to me within 2 weeks. If I don't hear from you in 2 weeks, at that point, I have permission to call you and check in and see what you've decided. Now, somebody's asking about length. I mean, mostly these conversations altogether, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But the part where you're actually talking about your group and you're talking at them, brief, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. The old line in sales is sell the benefits, not the features, which means talk about the impact of your work rather than all the logistical things you do to do the work. And one of the problems here is we tend to oversell. We tend to give donors more information than they need to make a good decision. So I would want to frame it with a little bit of information, and then do you have any questions? And then a little more information, and then ask them a question. And I want to make it a dialogue, not make it a monologue. And so that's the danger of the pitch. It becomes a monologue. All right, let's go to the next slide. So what we want to do here is identify and assign who we're going to talk to. And to me, it's always the ABC, and the ABC helps you remember. It's a memory trick. A, ability. Do they have money? B, belief. Do they care? C, contact. Do you actually have a way to get to them? And what I want to stress here is that in order of importance, these are inverted. The contact, the relationship, the access, number one. What they care about, their belief, how committed they are to the mission, number two. How much money they have is the least important of the three. And a classic mistake that people make when they're new to fundraising is they ask the wrong question. They ask the question, who's rich, instead of the question, who do we know? And what they end up with is a list of rich strangers that nobody knows. So I got to tell you, this is a fantasy list, right? It's not a prospect list. So we have to start with our own circles of relationships and influence, and who do we know? As I mentioned earlier, half of the people you know are donors already to nonprofit organizations. And I believe some of them are giving more than you realize. So we have to identify those folks. And once we have that list, then we have to start making assignments. And the way I used to do this back in the day when we could physically get in a room is after we have the gift chart, I would tack up on the wall. I'll send you this as an exercise. I've written this down. I would tack up on the wall flip chart paper with different amounts. Here's the $500 page. Here's the $1,000 page. Here's the $2,500 page. There's the $5,000 page. There's the $10,000 page. And I give everybody markers. And maybe we even have a donor list for the organization if we feel like we need some names to get started. And I said, everybody, start walking around the room and write down the names of anybody you know that you think could give that amount of money. And if you're actually willing to talk to that person, put your initials after their name so we know that you are a potential contact for them. And sometimes I call this the pizza and beer exercise because it's perfectly done with pizza and beer. I mean, it's an informal sort of thing. You're gossiping about your neighbors, but you have to be confidential about it. Whatever's said in the room has to stay in the room. But it's the way that we begin to build out our prospect list. Next slide. And this is refreshed, so it'll be quick. We talked about this last week. About half of American households give. Typical household that gives is supporting multiple groups per year, 5 to 10 different organizations per household per year. And median household giving, when you add up what everybody gives, the multiple gifts they make, and you aggregate that, it's about $900 per household per year, which is a decent amount of money. And the implication here is depending upon where you draw the line as to who's a major donor, there's probably more of them out there than you realize. So in a minute, I'm going to send you into breakouts and I'm going to give you a question to answer. But before I do, let me see if there are any questions for me to answer. Dee, is there anything in chat for me to address?
I don't see anything.
Nice. All right. Well, I know you guys are out there. So we're going to give you some work to do here. Can we go to the next slide? So I'm going to assume, and I could be wrong, but I'm going to assume that everybody on this call is either a donor giving your money or a volunteer or both. And I want to know why you give. And it could be the organization you're representing here today, or it could be generically. Either way works. But I want to know what motivates you as a donor. So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to drop you into groups of 3 or 4, notary. And I imagine you've all done breakouts on Zoom by now, but if you haven't, what happens is you're going to get an invitation that says go to room 3, and you click on that and you go to room 3. And you're going to find that there's 2 or 3 other people in that room. What I would like you to do as far as a process is you can say your name, you can say your group's name. And then what I want you to do is to talk for, roughly a minute about why you give. Like what motivates you as a donor. When it's your turn, you go to the next person. I want to make sure there's enough time for everybody. You're going to have 5 minutes in this breakout. So time check, 5 minutes. And when we come back, what I'm going to ask you to do is to drop into chat all the different things you talked about. What are all the different motivations that you heard that might inspire somebody to give? So breakouts will begin now. We were going to give them 5 minutes. We'll stop the recording during the breakouts. I think the courtesy is when you go to your breakout room, if you're off camera, it's nice to turn on the camera. You don't have to, but I think it is a courtesy for people to be able to see you during breakouts. So encourage you to do that if you're comfortable with that. And you can stop the screen share.
We'll give you a reminder in just a second here. So we'll stop share and opening the rooms. Enjoy.
So double bonus points from Oleanne. Well done. Any other? Oh my God, there's 13 in here. Look at this. They're coming. Connection. Yeah, Noel says they asked. Believe in the mission. Yeah, this is good. Well done, people. So my point here, and let's go back to the slide deck. My point here is that people like to give. It's a positive thing. It enriches folks. And, I'm going to reference a colleague of mine, Kim Klein, who's one of the gurus of grassroots fundraising. And Kim talks a lot about the language we use in fundraising and how shameful it is. And we talk about hitting people up for money, right? That's horrible. We talk about targeting donors. Bring in the big guns, we say, they'll raise the money. Like, let's go shake them down. And, we have all these violent metaphors for fundraising, which is horrible. And so I will flip the metaphor here. Fundraising is an ask that you make with good heart, pure heart, good intention. You make it with the understanding that sometimes people say no. But you also make it with the idea that when people say yes, they benefit too. It's not just about you as the asker, the giver benefits. People like to do this. So let's go to the next slide. I'm appreciating your excellent catalog of why people give, and we'll save the chat log and send it along to you afterward. So the process here is pretty straightforward. We want to identify the prospects. We want to begin with the people who are already giving to us. We want to rate them. So rating is how strong a relationship do we have with them combined with how much we think they might give. So a 1A might be someone who is really strong, really close to our organization, and we think has the capacity to make a lot of gift. That'd be like a 1A. Maybe you have a 3C, and a 3C is somebody who is not very strong and you don't think has a lot of capacity, and you could do all those permutations, 1B, 1C, etc. If people want to get more information on prospect rating, I can send it to you. And this is a chance to say that if you want to be on my email list and stay in touch with me that way, and I do something called Train Your Board, which is a blog and a newsletter and so forth. If you put your email address in chat, if you opt in, we will make sure that you're added to my list as well. And I'll mention this again at the end, but if you want to do that, feel free. And then your goal is to set amounts and start talking to people, which gets me to the next step. Next slide, please. We want to engage those donors, right? So we want to set up appointments. Usually that's letters and or email, scheduling by phone or email. And, if you can't meet in person and you need to do this by phone or by Zoom because that's what's available, go for it. In person is always the best choice. And I would really push for that whenever that seems like it's doable. But please understand that it's not going to always be doable. And sometimes you just can't do that. Next slide. So the accountability piece is a big deal. And you maybe have some well-intentioned volunteers who gather to get trained and learn this stuff, and they accept prospects and they're ready to go. And then like weeks go by and you don't hear from them. Are they calling people? Are they scheduling meetings? Are they following through? So you need to have periodic check-ins. And if you go back to that calendar, which we don't have to do on the slides because we did send it to you, you'll notice over this 12-week period, there's 2 or 3 check-ins where you get people together by phone or Zoom or in person. It's like, let's go through your list. How are you doing? Are you following up with your people? How much have you raised so far? What are you hearing from people? And, you know, if you want to incentivize this, it's fine. Like the first person who, you know, gets 10 meetings scheduled, we'll buy you a pizza, or, you know, we'll get you dinner to 2 at your favorite restaurant. And I think that's fine. I think, you know, those sort of silly prizes are great, and it does actually motivate some people. Next slide. Now, this comes from our colleagues at the Iowa Sierra Club, who's I showed you their gift pyramid earlier. And what they did, and I thought this was brilliant, is they actually created an in-house newsletter just for the volunteers who were working on the campaign. And they did it weekly. It was 2 pages. It was set up as a PDF they could send out to people just to nudge folks and say, here's what we did, here's what we've accomplished, here's where we are. And I love that they have this little thermometer that shows how they're going to goal. They're at only 11% of goal, so they haven't really raised very much. And then you can't see this very well, but it's got the executive committee members, so that's their board, and it's got the names. And then it's how many people have started their asks and how many have completed them. And you'll notice by the little X, only 1 person had started them, and obviously no one has completed them. So this is a gentle little way to say to folks, hey, get off your butts and do something now. And by actually having their names up there and who started and who's completed, there's sort of this public accountability piece, like everybody knows. And I'm good with that. I'm okay with a little peer pressure in this situation, but also it's a way to celebrate who is following through. And I don't mean to shame folks for not doing their work, but if people are going to commit to stuff, then we need at least some way to help them follow through. And I think this is a pretty good strategy. Next slide. Final step here is let's have a party. Like we get to the end of the campaign, let's thank people. And, you know, it's worth saying you should not be engaging with donors until you have systems set up to thank them and appreciate them. So we want to make sure we're getting those thank you notes out, or maybe we're organizing a thank you event at the end of the campaign. They're to have the wrap-up party. So I want to celebrate the volunteers, celebrate the donors. It's good to do some evaluation. Like, what do we learn? What worked? Next time, if we do it again, how will we do it differently? I would love it if you're transparent about this. And the everyone on that 4th bullet is the board, the staff, the donors, the volunteers. They should all know how this went. And if you're really slick, what you do when you wrap up the first campaign is you figure out, all right, who's ready to step up and provide leadership for the next one? And maybe it's not for 9 months from now, but it's nice to identify those leaders early if you can. So that's the model. And I think it's really flexible, right? You can add, subtract some of those steps. The 12-week thing is a placeholder. There's an organization I know that does this twice a year for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, they literally shut down the office, and everybody who works there does major gift fundraising. And week 1 is training and role play and phoning donors to set up appointments. Training, role play, phoning, training, role play, phoning, boom, 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 boom. In the second week, they go out and do as many donor visits as they can. They're trying to do 3 or 4 visits a day. That's their target. And it's literally a 2-week, all hands on deck. I mean, people are still responding to emails and the margins and stuff, but pretty much the office shuts down. And so that's the way they do it. It's a 2-week blast through it, get everything done. And I think that has some merit. So the point here is that the model is flexible. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Questions and/or comments. And we're going to do this 2 ways. I'm happy to take them on chat. I think we're going to queue up the slides again in a minute, but go ahead and close the slide deck so we can see some more faces up here. And you can probably unspotlight me. And I would love to hear from folks. Use chat, or if you are more comfortable unmuting and talking, it's not that big a group and we could accommodate that. So feel free to either put something in chat or verbalize a question. I see Ron's got your hand up. So Ron, go ahead and unmute and we'll hear from you.
Andy, this has been a good way to bucket up and frame how we go forward. Specifically, the San Diego Veterans Coalition is an organization of organizations, and they are all in their campaign fundraising modes. year round, and I get hundreds of emails from them asking me for money.
Of course.
Now, how, and so asking the asker, that's kind of my question, because we almost have to reach outside those that are asking us for money or
Yeah.
asking me for money.
Yeah.
Respond to that a little bit. for
Sure.
me, if you will.
So I think this is a both and, not an either or. And what I mean is, if you are creating a campaign and you've got volunteers who are going to go out and solicit, I think job one is for them to make a gift themselves if they're able to do it. And I'm less concerned about the amount and I'm more concerned about the participation. So if I'm going out to a donor, I want to be able to say, for example, 100% of the board has contributed to this campaign. And to be honest, I'll tell you, because we have a diverse board, their gifts have ranged from $50 to $5,000. It gives you a sense of who's on the board. And those are the donors we're out talking to as well. So I wouldn't come to you if I didn't have my own people giving first. And I want to be able to brag about that. Now, there are certainly circumstances where there's exceptions to this. And I appreciate that there are boards where not everybody is in a position to give. I'm respectful of that. I would also say, one of the advantages of monthly giving is that people can make small gifts that add up to something. And you may have somebody who says, you know what, I can't give $100, but I could give $10 a month. And I'm like, bring it. That's beautiful. That's a real gift. So I'm trying to set a bar that's everyone can cross over. Having done that, then I think you go out into the world and say, let's find some additional, we've already asked each other. Let's get wider circles here and see who else we know who might be able to give. And a classic fundraising exercise, and Rhea, if you'll remind me, I'll send this to you to send to everybody, is you get out the flip chart page, or you could do this on Zoom, and you have the concentric circles, right? It's the target. And what's at the center circle is the board and the staff and the key volunteers. But the next ring out might be some of the veterans you serve, some of the partner agencies you work with, groups like the Bob Woodruff Foundation who support you. The next circle out is maybe some of the current structures that support the military that you're not engaged with yet, or maybe it's friends and family, or maybe it's businesses that are vendors to your organization that you're already spending money with. And the idea is you do these concentric circles. And the strategy of fundraising is always, we start with the people who are closest, who are at the center, and we work our way outward. And I'd want to map that. I mean, I literally would want to map that with your team and say, if we do this concentric circle exercise, who are the constituencies that should be on it, and where do we start, and how do we work our way out? So it's a long-winded answer, but it's what I got.
And then I guess, so would a good strategy be to reach to the individual that are participating in the coalition for an individual gift rather than an organizational gift? Or is it a both and?
Oh, it's a both and.
Okay.
Yeah, it's totally a both and. And again, I don't want to be aggressive or annoy people unduly. I mean, I have to say, how do I say this nicely? It's very hard to do fundraising without annoying somebody, right? You are going to piss somebody off in this process. And if our goal is zero annoyance, we're not really fundraisers. But you can moderate that. You can mitigate that. And, what you might say to somebody is the effect of, I'm doing this work. I'm excited about the work. It's having a big impact on the community. If you want to participate, we would love to have your support. If you have other commitments, if you're not able to give at this time, if this is just not a thing for you, I totally respect that. It's okay. So if you're able and willing, come on. If you can or don't want to, that's okay. We'll talk to other people and they'll say yes, right? So I'm not about pressuring people. I don't think that works. But I think, I'll simplify this for you, Ron. There's two jobs in fundraising. Job number one is the asker. The asker's job is to ask. Job number two is the decider. The decider is the person who says, yes, I'd like to help, or no, thank you, I don't want to help. And the tendency is we confuse those two jobs, right? We're like, I'm not going to ask her, she's broke. I'm not going to ask him, he has other priorities. I'm not going to ask them, they've already given. And what we do when we do that is we disempower people. Basically, I'm making decisions for other people. I'm like, I'm not going to ask her, I'm not going to ask them. I'm disempowering them. Like, shame on me. I mean, your work is empowerment. That's what you all do, right? And when you choose not to ask somebody because you think they don't care or you think they don't have the money, you have taken that decision away from them. And shame on me and shame on you for doing that, right? That ain't the work. So I think if you ask humbly and with a good heart, people won't get annoyed. They might say no, but they'll roll with you on it. All right. Are there other questions? Let me go into chat and see what's there, because I did see a couple in there.
Two really great ones in the chat, Andy, that I'm curious about. Does
Bring
it help to give donors a little something as a thank you? And then the second question, any help on how to fundraise for an operational expense rather than something you can describe, an event?
Love it. Okay, so let's do the first one first. What I would say, and this is the classic cliche, is if you know one donor, you know one donor. And so some donors might want a gift, some donors might not want a gift, right? Some donors want this, some donors want that. And there's a tendency to sort of generalize. So should you give a gift to a donor? It depends on the donor. I think everybody deserves a thank you. And that can be a thank you in person, a thank you on the phone, a thank you through the mail, a thank you through email. It can be a combination of those things. I mean, I may have said this on these webinars already. If I'm being redundant, I apologize. I am all about the handwritten thank you note. I go to my local card shop and craft shop and I buy a bunch of beautiful cards and then I write thank you notes. I mean, I'm a chair of a board. I'm doing this as a volunteer. And I have people stopping me on the street, thanking me for thanking them. That has happened to me more than once. So is that a great thing? Yeah. Does that mean I have to buy a prize for them or a toy or a snack? I don't think so. Now, the second question was general operating support. And let me say that one of the reasons we go to individual donors is most individuals do not restrict their gifts. If you're writing a grant, you're probably getting restricted money. If you're going to a business, you're probably getting restricted money. If you're going to an individual, we want that unrestricted operating support, no strings money, because that is the stuff that keeps us alive. Now, it's on us to pitch that better, right? If that's not about the donor, that's about you as the solicitor. So I think the way you frame it is you say, here's the whole suite of programming that we do. We provide education. We provide emotional support. We provide housing support, whatever y'all do. I mean, I don't know, I'm making this up. You know, we provide classes. We provide a place for veterans to come together where they have community. When you give us a gift, you support all of those functions. You support all the different pieces of work that you do. If you are mostly interested in one specific thing and you want to direct your gift to that thing, we can have a conversation about that. But what helps us the most is the unrestricted dollars that allow us to serve everybody and allow us to pull up the full suite of services that we offer. And I would ask you to consider that. So again, it's on us, pointing at me, it's on us as the solicitors, as the askers, to get comfortable pitching that way. And ultimately the donor decides, but you know, we can make a compelling case for why that unrestricted money is necessary. Dee, is there anything else in chat?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, we're coming up on time, so this is actually pretty good. If you have more questions, feed them in. Ree, let's go back to the slides just so I can show the last couple of slides. Now, we are, because November is busy, we're getting questions. Let's go to the next one. We got one more webinar, but it's not for about another 4 weeks. It's on the 18th of November, and it's all about major gift solicitation. I'm going to teach you how to do the ask. Today's a really good warm-up for that. So I'm going to walk you through the ask in a lot more detail. I'm going to do a practice role play in front of the group. I will recruit somebody, and then I have you practice a little bit with each other. So be aware there will be a little bit of role play for you. If that freaks you out, you should come anyway, because you need to practice. Next slide. Here's a book I did with my friend Andrea, and I'm going to send you a few exercises from this book. There's a whole lot of exercises in here about setting up appointments, meeting with donors, good questions to ask, all that stuff. So you can check this out if you're interested. And then the last slide is my contact info. Again, if you want to be on my e-list and hear from me, go ahead and put your email address in chat, and Hunter or Ree or somebody will harvest those and send them to me at some point, and I'll add you to my list and I'll stay in touch. I'm not terribly aggressive. I tend to send out a couple of emails a month. So you won't hear from me a lot, but hopefully you'll hear from me in a way that's effective. So Let's drop the slides. A last chance for questions. Is there anything else in there, Dee? And then I'll let you do the wrap.
I don't think so. Just a lot of comments and reinforcement of things we've discussed today.
Lovely. Well, I am always appreciative of the chance to work with all of you, and especially with my colleagues here at the foundation. Dee, I think it's to you to send them off with something.
Absolutely. I see we're at 5 o'clock Eastern. So big thanks to everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules. As Andy said, part 2, I know there's going to be a month of suspense here, but part 2 of this webinar is November 18th, which I believe is a Thursday at 4 o'clock Eastern. And just a reminder again, these webinars will hang on our website.
Right.
If you want to revisit something you learned today or have a colleague listen, you're welcome to. And big thanks to Andy. I know I learned a lot and just really appreciate the hour together.